Dear participants, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening from wherever you are joining us today, and welcome to the third MEKST webinar. Today we will talk about the alternative methods of cultural tourism during the COVID-19 global pandemic. This is an interactive webinar, so I invite you to ask the questions or simply to write some of your observations or to share your experiences with us. I would like to ask you to specify whether your question is for all panelists or for someone specific. This is the third MEKST panel. We will have it more in the field of tourism, hotel and MICE industry in the following period. So I invite you to send us your suggestions on the topics you would like to be covered. It is my incredible honor to present you today's panelists. I would like to welcome Nemanja Milenković, Program Director of Novi Sad 2021 European Capital of Culture Foundation. James Kennell, Program Leader for Tourism, Events and Hospitality and Principal Lecturer, University of Greenwich. Dušan Medin, Teaching Assistant, Faculty for Culture and Tourism, University of Donja Gorica, Montenegro. Hello and welcome. Global COVID-19 pandemic has stopped tourism, followed by all other unnecessary activities, which influence the work reduction of various stakeholders in tourism at the destination. Therefore, cultural institutions were closed, cultural programs and events were suspended. This situation forced people to turn to alternative solutions such as online virtual museum and gallery tours, online concerts and plays. What is your opinion about these alternative solutions? And among those you had an opportunity to see, which is the best example? Nemanja, would you like to start?
Thank you, Maria. It's my great honor and pleasure to be with such nice guests and with all your people who are looking at this conference. It happened 2 or 3 months, and of course, if we say it's a new perspective or way of working of cultural institutions, it's not true. They are already started doing that in the past, but in this moment, it becomes maximized, in this process of pandemic. So, online concept of working is something that becomes something natural and normal. But I do believe, I hope so actually, that it will stop in these few months, because of course the online, and we already started even in our foundation, our own production, some kind of webinar, some kind of concert that we recorded in the past, or even live discussions about the world music or the literature. Everything is really good, but at the end, maybe I'm too much X generation, but I do believe nothing can change that kind of personal touch of experience. And if you allow me, I have some example, from that movie, Good Will Hunting, that conversation between Robbie Williams and Matt Damon, and you remember that movie, that every shoot couldn't work with him because Matt Damon was some kind of, Good Will Hunting. Actually, he was some kind of genius and rebel in the same time, and nobody can make the connection with him. But Robert Williams realized that, that crucial moment when he spoke with him, you're a genius and you know so many facts, and you know about David or Michelangelo or Nefertiti, but you've never been there. You never experienced that. You don't have that kind of moment that you remember with your girlfriend, with your future wife that he mentioned. So yes, it's a good alternative way, but I hope so it will not be, the normal way of thinking, because at the end, of course, the millenniums, they are much more the online platforms, but after all, you have much more, events, culture events, festivals, and everything else, because nothing can change the personal experience in the events, in the museums. For example, Hermitage opened their doors and you have 5 hours to watch all the amazing things in that museum. But at the end, nothing can change when you are there, when you experience it personally. So my hope is that the second wave of this pandemic will not happen, because it will really change so many things, not only in the culture, of course, the tourism, but I hope it's the past. It's something that we will left behind us.
Definitely, I agree with you. James, would you like to continue?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to take part in this. And it's great to be taking part with such great panelists. So thank you very much. I think there are two different things going on with cultural organisations at the same time at the moment. I think firstly, there's this determination to get back to normal as quickly as possible. Now, I don't think anyone really knows what normal is going to be, but for a lot of cultural institutions, it's about doing what they've always done and caring about what they've always cared about, which is their collection, their artifacts, their performances, their narratives, with different numbers of visitors, with tourists or not tourists, with more or less government support. I think a lot of institutions just want to get back to normal as quickly as possible. So I think that's one of the things that's going on. But then on the other side, I think we're seeing a real acceleration of trends that were already there in the sector to try and become more digital, to reach out to much broader audiences, to become more international, whether that is bringing people to a place or reaching out to them. That trend is accelerating. We're seeing a lot more use of technology, obviously, a lot more focus on young people and audiences of the future. If we're, a lot of institutions are thinking now, okay, well, the next year, the next 2 years, who knows how long, audiences are going to shrink. So we need to think about audience development, about engaging young people internationally to build audiences for the future. I think that's all stuff that was happening anyway. And this crisis is just pushing that and moving people a lot faster through that. So in the UK, for example, our National Theatre has had a programme for a number of years called National Theatre Live, where they broadcast the performances from the National Theatre into cinemas around the country. But those cinemas still have quite high barriers to access them. You have to buy a ticket, you have to have the right kind of cinema near you that would rather show a National Theatre broadcast of Shakespeare rather than some kind of Hollywood blockbuster. And not everyone's had access to that. Now, because of this crisis, they're putting everything on YouTube. And now it's available to everybody all over the world, all at once. Now, they probably would have got there in 5 years' time, but this has made them do it in 5 weeks. And I think that's what we're seeing for a lot of cultural organisations, is they're moving through this kind of digital cycle just so much quicker than anyone expected.
Thank you, James. Dušan, what is your opinion?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would like to say thank you for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to participate in this, I would say, interesting and maybe important event also. And first of all, let me also tell you and wish to all of us and to all of our participants and listeners, happy Day of Europe. We forgot that actually today is those 9th of May and the day of victory against fascism. And I read this morning to some portals that celebrating and memorializing that event was somehow in not such a, with no big audience, with no big celebrations. It was just done, putting the flowers and something like that, which this big date doesn't deserve. It deserves such a bigger way of celebrating, but of course we are now in that special position and it is normal to do in that way. But my opinion and my experience with this almost 2 months of this kind of isolation and completed changed way of living and working, especially in domain of culture, where we need those personal experience. And as colleagues says before, where we need those experience of seeing something directly and meeting people, having that aspects of communication. It really changed now. And what I can say about Montenegro and my experience here, and experience of our institutions is that we finally, I would say, and luckily, finally put everything at those digital platforms, meaning that we now have a bigger possibility to see some exhibitions. They are followed by media, TV or radio, like small TV shows. Some libraries open their collections, digitalize it. And of course, our ministry was also doing one very good project, meaning digitalizing cultural events like TV shows, or no, like theater shows and other performance, putting that on internet platform, and also providing us via TV, via RTCG, Radio Televizija of Montenegro, to watch it from 8 o'clock till almost midnight every day, which I think is very good, because that's kind of popularizing culture among the very wide audience, who usually don't go to the theater or maybe don't go to the concerts, and also don't go to the exhibitions. But now when you have those shorter or longer digital forms, which are very approachable because they're on the national TV channel for a few hours per day, and also put on their YouTube channel, somehow culture came to people, if I can say something like that. And it's on us to grab it and to enjoy in that possibility. And I hope that such kind of transformation and changings will continue in the future. Of course, I don't expect that we will have every day, from today in the future, for 5 or 6 hours of cultural program on TV, but some possible activities like that would be, I would say, very, very welcome and very good, and helping popularizing high culture and popular culture among the people and among the audience.
Thank you, Dušan. Having in mind the possibility of online exhibitions, concerts, and theater performances, would these alternative methods affect the future visiting of cultural institutions? To what extent would it be possible to experience the visit in this way? James, would you like to start?
Thank you. I think as long as I've been working in tourism, there have always been predictions that online tourism would eventually replace people needing to travel, and that we wouldn't need to go to events anymore. We wouldn't need to meet people face to face anymore, because the internet would interrupt all of this. But actually, what we've seen over the last 20, 30 years is just the steady growth of international travel, of more and more destinations opening up, and of people coming together in destinations. So I don't see that this change is going to fundamentally alter that or change that upward trend in tourism. But I think it is interesting to note at the moment that destinations and cultural institutions have been brought together over the last 20 years through cultural tourism. And now that's gone for a while, that relationship needs rethinking a little bit. I think actually cultural institutions have a mission which goes beyond just bringing in international tourists and filling up hotels. They have a cultural mission to fulfill, whereas destinations don't really, and destination management organizations don't really. They have other kinds of priorities that are much more to do with economic impacts and job creation and so on. And I actually think there's something at the moment that destinations can be learning from what these cultural organizations are doing, to think about how to curate a destination and how to present a destination in a more dynamic, engaging, digital way for really diverse audiences, because there are no cultural tourists coming at the moment. But people still want to learn and they want to be engaged, and destinations must have a role to play in that. And maybe learning some of those more curatorial techniques that arts organizations are so great at, understanding how to take an artifact or an object, whether that's a place or a natural resource that the destination has, and how to interpret it for different audiences, present it in multiple ways online to try and engage people, and maybe break away a little bit from that idea that destinations have a 12-month marketing campaign, which they pay a consultant to develop, and then they implement it for 12 months, and at the end, they measure it based on economic impact. Well, for the next 12 months, that's probably not really going to work. So looking at what cultural organizations are doing, I think tourism marketers can learn a lot. But in the long term, tourists will come back, and I think everybody will want business as usual as soon as possible.
Nemanja, what do you think?
Well, when you start something what is normal, it even makes, how to say, another reaction. Even more people like that. Sorry, I'm giving this example from history, but after the prohibition, 5 years after that, there is not enough industry for making alcohol for the market in the United States. So, I do believe people maybe will go much more to travel all around the world to another destination. And what this kind of online concept of working is helping, of course, it's helped that someone said, I read it, that it will not change the future, this pandemic, if we stay like this in this moment. But if we'll make it something faster, like Jem said, some institutions, culture institutions, they are much more conservative, and like he mentioned, the Shakespeare Theatre, they will do it in 5 years. But in this moment, they just make it faster. But still, I will back from my first answer. It will help in the promotion, in cultural branding of the content. The content, and of course, the organization. I can say that I have a very young team. And in these 2 months, I changed, I don't know, or actually I put it on my desktop, 6 some different communication platforms to work. And it's really amazing for me, 10 years before, we couldn't have the conference with 30 people to speak together. And it's now possible from our homes, we've done it. And it's helped, as I said, how the concept of the organization of the culture events will happen faster or better, whatever. And of course, the promotion. But, that experience, and I repeat that, and the content, I do believe it will not change. Because, of course, it helped me to watch. I watched the Shakespeare Theatre. It was interesting for me to see how they done it. And it's very nice. But for me, it was the promotion of that. When I will go to London, to go there to see that again. Because I spoke with some older citizens, and they said they're very sad they can't go to theater, for example. And I asked one old lady why it's so important for her. She said, it's not only the experience in the theater, it's also some kind of, of the process preparing to go to theater, to put your clothes, to call someone special for you to go with you. Because that theater, I can watch that concert, whatever, in my shorts or t-shirt, but it's not the same. When you go into some space, it's something special. Even the smell of that, it's not the same. We will see what will happen in the future. VR changed that experience, but still, in this moment, I can't believe in that.
I totally agree with you. Dušan?
Yes, so do I. And especially after the theater and after the concert, when you go with your friends and family and whoever, wherever, that's something also priceless, I can say that on the example of Montenegro, during this period, many galleries, many museums, libraries, spread their program digitally and online. And I think that kind of thinking and a little bit shifting from those physical to the digital platform was good and was necessary, because in our country, I would say that we still did not develop enough. And maybe comparing with some other countries and institutions, that model of promotion, I would say, first of all, promotion of the content which we like to share, and hope that they will continue doing such things in the future also. And it was interesting for me to think about those few last days. I mean, one last week when we finally opened those museums, galleries, libraries for the audience. And I was in contact with a few of my friends, colleagues who work there, and they told me that, of course, no one is entering in the museum now or in the library or the gallery. But that's not very unusual, because in general, regular people, don't go very often to those institutions. Even we who are working in those institutions or collaborate with them, we go not so often, but just when we need something. The regular people even less. So thinking about the audience, thinking about popularizing those institutions and what they have to share with us is, I would say, our long-term, especially in our country here, a long-term, strategy. We should work very much on that. And of course, we should think more about those kind of cultural tourism, especially in our, maybe museums, no, because museums are more or less popular, especially here at the Adriatic coast, in old town of Kotor, Perast, Budva, Petrovac. But other cultural institutions, if we would like to somehow interest and attract the audience, I'm mostly thinking about libraries, for example. I'm thinking also about the archives. Who goes to the archives? Almost no one, but archives also can share and can present us some very important things. I mean, they are collectors of memory, collectors of history somehow, not only for the scientists. But there are many questions like that, and examples where we should think more about, how to popularize the work we are doing. And this period a little bit helped us, I would say, to go wider.
And I'd just like to just to pick up on something you said, Dušan, and reflect what Nemanja said as well about the lady who wanted to go to the theatre, and she wants the whole experience of going to the theatre. And you're talking about popularizing, and I think that experiences are so important. And cultural tourism is often a way to create excellent experiences around these kind of cultural products. And services that are good for cultural tourists are also good for local people, for domestic tourists, for local communities. If you can put a great restaurant and a brilliant bar near an archive and convince the archive to be more public facing and tourists come, then also local people will be more interested in to see what's going on. So developing cultural tourism is a win-win, I think, in that kind of situation.
Thank you. Exactly.
Yeah, definitely. You gave me the great introduction to my next question. We already mentioned that promotion is so important, but how important you find the activities that cultural institutions started in order to maintain the relation with the audience through social media networks, and what city destinations with the better promotion of culture offer have more chance to attract the tourists in the following period after the pandemic? Dušan, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm active on, of course, Facebook and Instagram, and in this period there are so many, promotions, so many sponsored, exactly, and mostly of that cultural institutions and cultural events, which I'm following the most at my profiles. And as I previously said, that's good. This a little bit moved us to those digital platforms and to those audience which is not or was not our regular audience. So popularization at this example of cultural institutions, not only in Montenegro, but even wider, that's good. That's a little bit, one more step or two more steps, which we should continue doing and making in the future also, especially in this digital world when we all live. I mean, internet is, the source for all of us, and for information, for visiting, for communications like we are doing now, and so on. But of course, those physical, live, and direct communication and visiting, or going to theater, going to opera, going to restaurant, whatever, it cannot be changed by any digital platform. It can be a little bit, how to say, those digital platforms, of course, can a little bit help us to pass in this period of impossibility for physical coming, and physical experience, but they cannot and they should not, I would say, change those real experience.
James, what do you think?
I think coming back to your question about whether destinations who do this well and project their cultural image well will be more competitive. I think it's a really city marketing, destination marketing is a really crowded space to be in at the moment, and there's so much pent-up demand in the market during this period of lockdown that everybody is going to be competing for the same tourists really soon. And I think for a lot of smaller destinations or destinations that haven't yet emerged into the international tourism market in a really meaningful way, this kind of activity around promoting culture and going straight into people's houses is incredibly powerful. And actually the reach that a national opera company can have, or that Exit Music Festival can have a greater social media following than the tourist organization of Novi Sad. Actually, these cultural products get directly to people in ways that tourism marketers and destination marketers can only really dream about. So I think there's an opportunity at the moment for destinations to kind of grab hold of this and go along with it, work in partnership with these organizations, and it will make them more competitive. And there are destinations that really struggle with their international image, and actually, as Dušan said, the only real way to overcome that is to bring people together and for people to communicate with each other face to face. But while that's not possible, communicating through culture does provide a kind of almost universal way of bringing people together, of creating some kind of shared experiences. And that's probably the best we have at the moment.
Nemanja, what do you think?
Well, I'm thinking about two things. The one is the facts, the rational part of our brain. It's, some kind of recipe for success. It's to work what you love, or opposite, to love what you work, to be the expert in that area. And the third is that everyone knows that you're an expert in that area. That's the importance of the promotion. There's the one thing. And the second thing is, of course, something invisible that culture brings into our soul. Like Isidora Sekulic said, it's writing people's souls. And what is soul? It's not touchable. It's not rational. It's, it's feelings. And that's the reason why it's important to have that culture. But culture is not only the creation of something, of concert, or it's experience, it's atmosphere. Because, when James mentioned some smaller destinations, it's, I can't say easier, but you will understand me well. When you have Big Ben in London, or you have Eiffel Tower, or you have pyramids in Cairo, it's amazing things that you can see and you can recognize. But in this kind of area, or kind of smaller countries, we don't have something amazing that's recognizable. And very often when you see the researches from the touristic approach, that what we send, hospitality, the warmness, the people, the food, that kind of things. So the culture helps, because the culture, as I said, it's not only the creation of something, it's also the way of living. And that way of living is spreading all around, because, for example, I've worked in Exit, and I'm now working European Capital Culture. People like to come in Novi Sad because they experience something different. And that differentiation is very important in competitive way of thinking in the future, because a lot of destinations compare to each other. And it's important to find something that is different. I don't want to say better, but different from the others. You have to ask Also, it's like even as a person, what is three things that I want to send as the advantage. So I do believe that the culture branding and the culture tourism is really important for making better image of some city.
I can't agree more with you. Yeah, would you like to add something?
I'd like just a little bit to add some my opinions of those small destinations which are already mentioned by colleagues, especially here in Montenegro, where we have more or less smaller cities and villages, especially at those coastal area, which is, I can say, mostly most touristic attractions are located there. But of course, full Montenegro has some other and interesting things to show. But here in the coastal area, people are mostly coming naturally during summer or autumn, going, to the sea, going to the beach, enjoying in the sunshine and beautiful sandy beaches. And it is also a big challenge for people who work in such a work and live in such part of the world where you have not only those cultural events and cultural tourism moments, but you also have those, regular tourists. You have good hotels, you have good, beautiful sandy beaches, clean blue sea, and now how to attract the tourists to come to the institutions. I mean, if you want, and I think we should want also them in our institutions and then to follow our program. For example, when our exhibitions when we have an exhibition opening, I mean, mostly they are coming local people and local artists who are interested exactly in that topic. I would rarely see the tourists in such an event. But on the other side, if they want to come to those local museums to see and to hear something about local culture, regular people, local people, usually don't going there. Tourists are going there. So it, of course, depends on the what we have to share with the audience and what kind of a program, and of course depends on the strategy of the institutions, who would they like to attract. I think that, and I'm speaking, as you hear, mostly about our Montenegrin examples, that here we need some bigger strategies and stronger connection between culture and tourism. And luckily we have one strategy, but it's brand new, I think from the last year, about cultural tourism strategy for next midterm period. And hopefully that some good positive changes will happen. But it's not only about the strategy, as we all know, it's about state of mind and about concrete steps, what to do to improve that situation. I hope that such kind of digitalization will help just maybe a little bit, but we'll see.
And I think that differentiation that you're both talking about is so important. Some work that we did through our Tourism Research Centre at Greenwich for the Regional Cooperation Council in Sarajevo, we looked at regional tourism across the Western Balkans, and exactly what Nemanja is saying. All the research says it's about the tourism product is about hospitality, but the problem is every country has great hospitality, and that it's not enough for the international market to be told there's great food, there's great people, because it might be true, but it doesn't help you to attract people to your destination. And why go to Budva when you can go to Hvar? Lots of destinations are competing on very similar basis. And the cultural products, the culture as it is lived by local people, but also what artists do, what festivals happen, what museums and galleries are there. They're the things that give real differentiation, I think.
Thank you. How is important the title of European Capital of Culture for one destination, and what it would mean for Novi Sad in terms of attracting the tourists in the following period when all destinations will fight for significantly reduced market? And since that Novi Sad will be the European Capital of Culture 2021, in which way the planned activities will be realized, and would it be affected by the whole pandemic situation? Nemanja, would you like to start?
Well, as I believe it's it's a personal question for me. Well, you know, first of all, you asked a few questions. You know.
Yeah.
First of all, maybe I start from the end. Yeah, it's a big question what will going to happen, because we have now discussions. Is it going to change, like for example, Olympic Games or European Championship in football? There is few, you know, arguments to maybe change from 2021 to 2022, but it's done. You know, it is something that two other cities, Timisoara and Sida from Greece, recognize. But at the same time, it's not the same situation, for example, for European capital cultures who are, for example, in Hungary, Westfall, they are in 2023. So for them, it's not too important to change the year. So now we are in a little bit discussion, and we will see the European Commission will and the Parliament will give the answer to that question. That's the one thing. The second thing is, of course, it's very important brand of European Union, European capital culture, especially because it confirmed themselves with the results, with the facts that it really brings something important to the cities. But there is, I have to say that it's great honor to be the part of 60 cities, because if you know that only in European Union you have more than 100,000 cities, and you're in the member of family of European capital cultures, only 60 of them who was and they will be in that 35 years, because it started in the middle of 80s. It's great honor to be the first city who are not in European Union from the state that like to be the part of it. But at the same time, it's advantage, but also disadvantage. What is the advantage? Because it's a strong brand, but it's a brand that brings you focus in 1 year. And you have to use that chance to build a strong legacy, even not only in the culture field, but also in the field of image of the city, because that focus can into 1 year and then it's gone, you know. And if you don't build something to make that image stay in the city, then it's not, I mean, it's just periodically in 1 year, and then it's just a circus that just gone from our city. And from the beginning, we want to change that. Our approach was, you know, not only to think about 2021, but actually to think about 2022, 3, etc. And it shows it was a good way of thinking, not only because of this pandemic, but also to build that legacy. We put it as we have that slogan for new bridges, and we build that bridges with the 4 pillars, with the people, processes, places, and programs. And we try that these 4 pillars to build another legacy, to stay, because we want the brand of the city stay, and after that title. So, as I said, it's a good chance, it's a really chance, but you have to use it in the best way you can do.
James, what do you think, how is important the title of European Capital Culture for one city and for Novi Sad for next year?
Well, it's hugely important for Novi Sad. I mean, as Nemanja said, it's an important program to be a part of. It makes a huge statement about the ambition of the city in terms of tourism and culture, and the city's commitment to its local population, because it's a huge investment of money and time and resources that could be spent on other things. And to commit to culture and events and tourism in that way is a hugely ambitious thing to do. And really the timing now, I mean, cities across Europe would pay billions to get that brand in 2021 or 2022, at a time when everybody is going to be looking for their tourism industry to recover. Novi Sad and Serbia more widely is going to have this huge concentration of attention in one place. And that, from a tourism marketing perspective, that's just incredible. That is exactly what you'd want, is a huge event to help as a catalyst for recovery. And then, as Nemanja said, as a catalyst for long-term development. European Capital Culture is a bigger brand than Novi Sad. and having the opportunity to become part of that. It's much bigger than hosting a Champions League final that moves around a different city every year and doesn't really leave any legacy. It's much more like hosting an Olympics and having the opportunity to announce yourself on an international stage in a way that people don't necessarily expect. So the opportunity to present Novi Sad and to present Serbia to international audiences through culture is something that is very special and very unique. And I think will be exactly what the city needs in 12 months' time or 18 months' time, or hopefully everything goes according to the schedule. But it is the kind of thing that tourism marketers dream of having, I think, in a recovery period.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you. Dušan, what do you think?
I'm agreeing. I agree also. And I would also like somehow to remind that, of course, Novi Sad, I would say, has always been a city of culture, which is very good and good advantage for you, Nemanja, and your team to just somehow improve it now. And also, on the other thing, Novi Sad still has a big audience, especially for Exit, which also is a great festival and made Novi Sad very famous. So this kind of opportunity will just be steps more. And I would say not only for this 2021, but also in the future, because this is like a good marketing spot and marketing a lot also in the future. For example, we have here Kotor, which is city and the area of Kotor is under UNESCO protection. So that brand and that membership in such a big UNESCO family, or some other families like European Capitals of Culture, is something which allows us big audience and big visitors. And I hope, and I'm actually sure that you will such opportunity use in the best possible way. And good luck, Nemanja, and your team.
Thank you very much. We need that. But I have to say, regarding to the last question, it's not only the hospitality enough. I'm quite proud, but because, of course, we doubled the number of tourists from bringing their title in the city in 2016. In this moment, of course, before the pandemic. But what is important for us is also that, for example, Novi Sad going in that competition with some even bigger and important cities like Prague, Budapest, Bratislava, that we have staying our tourists now not only one day just past, the city, they stay three nights, and it's very important. It shows that the content that we give them, it's interesting and they're like to stay. It becomes really city breaks destination, but not as a something that you just think. It's just the way they come to Novi Sad, and another second advantage of the city of Novi Sad and Serbia, of course, that you have very close the capital of Serbia, and it's advantage for Serbia because I do believe it's they're so close. The two largest cities in one country are very close. It's some kind of mega city. So that differentiation James mentioned, it's even more important because everyone who came to Belgrade is have to come to Novi Sad and opposite, But they have to be different, and there's a good way how they have to work together as a two brand as one, So I hope we will use that chance, but we will see it will happen. We are preparing for 2021, but at the end we will find what will change with the decision of European Commission. However it happened, as I said, we from the beginning started with our minds that it's important to build the brand of the city of Novi Sad, not just preparing some events for 2021 as a European capital of culture.
Yeah, I agree with Nemanja, and I think also that is huge advantage because Belgrade and Novi Sad is really close, and this is so important for tourist visit. And we are also really proud because of that title, European Capital of Culture. And this is something that Novi Sad is recognized with that culture in these years. And thank you, Nemanja, for that opportunity and your hard work to promote Novi Sad in this great way. I have the last question for you, and then I saw a lot of greetings from our attendees and some questions. In the way of visiting cultural institutions and events gathering large number of people would change, how do you think it would change? Do you think that cultural events organizers would include certain innovations in the way of program executions? Nemanja, would you like to start?
As I said, I had that nice sentence that it will not change the future, but it makes future comes faster than we expected because it's changed our perspective. And I'm not so sure because I'm a little bit watching, in Toba, someone mentioned, and I mentioned that VRs and everything else. And of course, it helps that some experience make it in a digital world even more greater. But at the end, I hope it will not be, the dominant way of working. Of course, the young people, the kids actually use much more the digital platforms that we done it in the past. But at the end, they have to play together. When you're in love with someone, you can't imagine VR. I know all apocalypse movies about the future, but I don't want to go too far about it because I do believe I'm quite optimistic that nothing can change personal touch. Of course, it will change. For me, if you ask me, of course, I would like to see from the movies to teleport myself, because when I'm traveling all around Europe, it's when you have to go to check in, to check out, it's something that really bothers you. But in the same time, Hitchcock said, what is the movie? Movie is just, it's a life without boring scenes, So, but that boring things that we done it in our lives, it's our life. It still stay our life. And sometimes the greatest idea about European capital culture and some other projects that I done it works on airport because I'm alone with myself. I'm reading something, I'm drawing something, and then what a great idea. And if I don't have that boring time, I will not have that chance to experience that, because I do believe when you can imagine something in your brain, you can make it really in your life. So yes, things will change because the telephone is not anymore telephone that my granny recognizes as a telephone. It's changed a lot. It's just the name of telephone, but it's a computer, it's calculator, it's the photo, it's the camera and everything else. But at the same time, we are still working, and this pandemic showed that after all, and we are watching 5 hours a day, this screen, but at the end, we need to find a third dimension. We need to find real persons. And I mentioned that the processes of making something is very important. Of course, you put it on your head, and I can do it in shorts, as I mentioned. But all that atmosphere that I'm preparing myself to go to concert, to some theater, but nothing can change that. I do believe in the future.
Thank you. James, what is your opinion?
I think in terms of whether cultural events will have to change, I think events were already changing. There was already a lot of technologically driven change happening and a lot of change around sustainability. And I think those are the two mega trends that are really going to change and shape the industry. I think what a lot of people are starting to question now is how useful are big events? How much more do I get out of it from meeting people, from being in the same room, from experiencing a culture in all its richness? And how much can I get from a webinar or a recording or a 360-degree tour? Those questions are now being asked in a much more serious way. And I think a lot of the ways that people are going to frame that is not really going to be about this pandemic, because hopefully the pandemic is over and we move on. I think a lot of it in the future will be about sustainability. I think actually that whether we can travel to large events, whether it is affordable, whether it is ethically acceptable, whether the modes of transport are effective, those will have a bigger impact, I think, in a much longer term. But in the short term, I think whether cultural events have to change operationally is really going to be dependent on the destination and what local lawmakers, what local regulations say. And you will always have more adventurous cultural tourists. At the moment, it might be the relatively young, the healthy, who may be happy to go into a kind of music festival style environment, might be happy to go to a country or a destination with lower levels of regulation and go to an event that has an element of risk because younger people are happier with that. And older audiences may look for the security of seated venues, of temperature checks, of monitoring and marshalling, and so on in the short term. But in the long term, I think it'll be the bigger trends that shape the future of events, and hopefully not this pandemic.
Thank you, James. Dušan, what do you think?
I, of course, agree with the colleagues. And I will also say that somehow this corona a little bit helped us, if I can say, so to slow down a little bit, to make less pollution, to think more about ourselves and about our families, our friends, and in general humans. And with that slowing down, I think that we finally maybe find a way to reach some things, you know, to spend more time with our friends, to spend, with our family, sorry, not with friends only digitally, and to think about those big problems like pollution, most of all. But in the concrete examples of our cultural institutions, because that was a question about it, I'm in our local examples, I'm not pretty sure what would be those big changes, if any, beside the fact of that digitalization, which is very good and I support it, but I'm not sure what will happen in the future, really. I think that people would somehow come back to those regular way of living and working, which they used to live even before. But somehow, if only digitalization will help, I think it's not bad. It's also good. One step.
Thank you, Dušan. I saw the interesting question, which is the exactly 3 questions, is for all panelists. When can we expect the opening of the facilities that are representatives of the world's major cultural attractions? What measures will be introduced as the condition of their opening? How soon is expected the recovery of this area of tourism? James?
It's a really difficult question to answer, because I don't think any of us have access to the information that governments will be using to make these decisions. But if we look at what's happening in different countries around the world at the moment, places that are starting to open up, there are still lots and lots of restrictions. And it might be that as a theatre, for example, you cannot open up with social distancing and sell enough tickets to make your performance not just profitable, but to make it possible at all. I think cultural tourism that is to do with venues and venue openings is very, very hard to predict when that will happen. But of course, cultural tourism is also to do with food and drink and music and architecture and the landscape and all of these things. And so in that sense, as soon as tourism gets going, then cultural tourism will get going again. Cultural tourists are just tourists, and people who don't think of themselves as cultural tourists also are cultural tourists. And so once that happens, once flights are taking place and borders are open, then cultural tourism will start in that way. But in terms of venue opening and institutions opening, I think that's really, really hard to predict.
Yeah, I agree. Would you like to add something?
Well, it's really I mean, James said everything. It's very hard to predict. And actually, it's like the last question from the quiz. Would you like to be the millionaire? Because if I know that question, I will sell it. Sorry, because I'm saying that, but it's really difficult to say. Everybody who is, of course, the tourism and the culture events, creative events, the festivals. I even read that information that 80% in tourism are going down. So we are actually on the first wave of damage in this pandemic situation. But what I like to see in the future, it will change. I really want to be optimistic because I do believe if we have 2 months of normal way of living, we will much more forget what had happened and try to going even better in the normal way of living. But I hope so it will not back into some kind of second wave, then it will be really disaster. In this moment, I don't believe it's a disaster. It's very dangerous, very difficult from this perspective in this part of industry, but the second one will be disaster. So I hope so we're finished with this, and I do believe we will recover from that part.
Yeah. We are out of time, so I would like to ask you if you would like to add something, like as a final word.
If I can, but just I will say a little bit more maybe theoretical question than practical. But for example, as James said before, cultural tourists, they are tourists. They are just tourists. And for me, it's interesting to think about, am I cultural tourist when I go somewhere else? No, I would usually say that I'm just, tourist or visitor who is interested in some cultural events or some exhibitions or institutions, but I'm also interested in some other, let's say, regular things, relaxing and spending time with my friends, meeting someone new. But of course, it can be a question for some other debate. I just felt free to mention this kind of theoretical, who are cultural tourists, and do they perceive themselves as cultural tourists because they also like to go to the bars, to hotel, to casino, or wherever, which usually has no any connection with culture in that normal sense, what culture means.
Yeah, thank you, Dušan. Dear Nemanja, James, and Dušan, thank you so much because you spent this Saturday with us and your willingness to be part of this webinar. Thank you for your professional view, predictions, and opinions. It was my pleasure to speak with you today. Dear participants, thank you because you were here today. I hope that we provided you with some new information and that you find this topic interesting. Follow our page MEKST conference in the social media networks and find information about the next webinar. And please send us your suggestions on the topics you would like to be covered. Thank you again and stay safe.